There are questions in the world of One Piece that have waited so long for answers that they have almost stopped feeling like questions at all. They have settled into the story the way old stones settle into a riverbed, smoothed by the current of nearly 3 decades, familiar to anyone who has read long enough, and yet still holding their shape beneath the surface where the water never quite reaches. Eiichiro Oda began drawing this story in 1997, and from the very first chapter, he was already burying things inside it, not carelessly and not as decoration, but with the patience of a man who knew the ending before he drew the beginning and was content to let the rest of us wait. Some of what he buried has been gently uncovered. Some of it has been explained slowly across hundreds of chapters in pieces small enough that you could miss the explanation while it was happening. And some of it is still down there, unsolved, strange, sitting quietly in the dark, waiting for the moment it was always meant to surface. Tonight we are going to sit with that last kind, the weirdest mysteries, the ones that do not fold neatly into any theory, the ones that have made readers stare at a single panel for years, certain they were looking at something important without being able to say what it was, the ones that feel less like plot and more like something Oda glimpsed in a dream and decided to leave half hidden in the corner of his world, a shape under it is sheet, a door at the end of a hallway that the story has not yet had a reason to open. None of these will resolve tonight. That is not the point. The point is to wander through them slowly, the way you might wander through a quiet house that belongs to someone you trust, touching the strange objects on the shelves and wondering without urgency what each of them is for. If these calm stories help you rest, you are welcome to subscribe before we begin. And as the night settles softly around you, we start with the strangest seat in all of One Piece. A chair at the very top of the world that no one is permitted to sit in the shadow of the person who does. There is a room at the highest point of the Holy Land of Mary Jewess, inside the great structure called Pangea Castle, and at the center of that room there is a throne. For 800 years, the world has been told that this throne is empty. It is called, in fact, the empty throne, and its emptiness is the entire point of it. When the world government was founded after the Great War that ended the Void Century, the 20 kings who created it are said to have agreed that no single person would ever rule the world. The throne was built and then deliberately left vacant, a chair with no occupant, a seat of ultimate power that ultimate power had agreed to leave alone. It was meant to be a promise carved into furniture. It was meant to say to anyone who entered that room across the centuries that the age of a single ruler was over, that the world was governed now by agreement rather than by one will, that the throne stood empty because the thing it represented had been retired forever. That is the story. And for most of One Piece, that story was all anyone had. The empty throne appeared in the background of scenes about the reverie, the great gathering of kings that happens once every 4 years, and readers understood it the way the characters understood it, as a symbol, as a piece of political history, as a quiet monument to a decision made long ago. What most fans did not know for the first 900 chapters of the story was that the throne is not empty at all. The promise is a lie. There is someone who sits in it. There has been someone sitting in it the entire time, hidden above the heads of every king and every government official and every reader who ever looked at that room and saw only a vacant chair. The figure is called M. The name is short, almost nothing, two sounds, and Oda has been so careful with it that even the way it is written carries a deliberate ambiguity. We do not know whether M is a man or a woman. The story has gone out of its way to keep this uncertain, drawing M in shadow, giving him a silhouette that refuses to settle into one category or the other, letting the characters who speak of M use language that does not commit. This is not an accident of translation or a gap that will be filled by a casual line of dialogue. It is a wall that Oda built on purpose, and the fact that he built it so carefully tells us that the answer matters, that the question of who and what is sits very close to the center of everything the story has been moving toward. What is known is small and strange. The five elders, the five ancient men who appear to sit at the top of the world government, who command the Marines and direct the cipher pole agencies and make the decisions that move the world, do not actually sit at the top. They kneel. When M is present, the five most powerful men in the visible world lower themselves to the floor, and they speak to M with a deference that they show to no one else, a deference that reveals in an instant that everything readers thought they understood about the structure of power was incomplete. Above the kings is the government. Above the government are the elders, and above the elders, alone, in a room the world believes to be empty, sits a figure who has apparently been there for 800 years. That last detail is where the weirdness deepens past politics and into something closer to the supernatural. The throne was built 800 years ago. The promise of its emptiness was made 800 years ago. And the implication the story has carefully allowed to form is that M was there at the beginning, that M is not a title passed down through generations, but a single continuous presence, a person who has not died across the entire span of recorded history. M appears to have lived through the void century itself, through the war that destroyed the ancient kingdom, through the founding of the very government that supposedly retired the throne. If that is true, then the most powerful being in the world is also among the oldest, a survivor of the exact era that the world government has spent 8 centuries erasing, someone who remembers the thing that everyone else has been forbidden to know. There is a moment when is first revealed that has stayed with readers ever since. M is shown holding a set of portraits, pictures of specific people in the present day world, and studies them in a private room and selects from among them the ones to be erased. The word used carries a chilling weight. Not defeated, not arrested, not opposed, but erased, removed from the world the way the ancient kingdom was removed, the way an entire century was removed, the way a name can be taken out of history so completely that the people who come after do not even know there is an absence where it used to be. Among the portraits M holds are faces the reader recognizes: a princess from a desert kingdom, a mermaid princess from the bottom of the sea, and the silent decision makes about them in that quiet room is one of the most genuinely frightening scenes in the entire series, precisely because it is so calm. There is no rage in it. There is only the unhurried attention of someone who has been making decisions like this for a very long time. So the questions stack on top of one another, each stranger than the last. Who is M? How has M lived for 800 years? What did M see during the Void Century? And which side of that ancient war did M stand on? Why does the figure at the top of the world fear a desert princess and a child of the sea enough to mark them for erasure? And underneath all of it, the question that the empty throne was built to bury, the question has apparently spent 8 centuries keeping buried what really happened at the end of the ancient kingdom, and why is the truth of it so dangerous that the world must be ruled in secret to keep it from ever coming back? The throne was supposed to be empty. The emptiness was supposed to be a promise. Instead, it turned out to be the most carefully kept secret in the world, a hidden ruler in a hidden room, watching everything, deciding everything, and waiting, like so much else in this story, for a confrontation that has been 800 years in the making. Before we go further into the dark, you can subscribe for more gentle One Piece stories made for rest. And as you lie there, somewhere between the day that is ending and the sleep that is coming, I would love to know where in the world you are listening from tonight. The next mystery is quieter than a hidden ruler, and in some ways stranger, because it is not about power at all. It is about a voice that almost no one in the world can hear, that speaks without words, that comes from things that are not supposed to be able to speak at all. There is a power in One Piece that has nothing to do with strength, and it is one of the rarest things in the entire world. It is not a devil fruit. It cannot be trained into existence the way a fighting style can be trained. It is not granted by any government or earned through any trial. It is simply something that a very small number of people are born able to do, and most of them go their whole lives without fully understanding what it is. The story calls it the voice of all things, and the people who can hear it are connected across generations and across the great divides of the world by something that the rest of the cast cannot perceive and can barely believe. The voice of all things is, at its simplest description, the ability to hear what cannot ordinarily be heard. People who possess it can sometimes understand the speech of animals, not in the cartoonish way that some devil fruit users can, but in a deeper sense, hearing the actual intent and feeling behind a creature that has no human language. They can hear, in some cases, the voices of things that are not alive at all. The most important application of this power, the one that bends the entire plot of the series around it, is that a person who can hear the voice of all things can read the poneglyphs, the indestructible stone records scattered across the world that hold the forbidden history of the Void Century. Not read them the way a scholar reads them, by learning the ancient script through decades of study. The voice of all things lets a person hear what the stones are saying directly, as if the stones themselves were speaking, as if the people who carved them 800 years ago had left their voices inside the rock to be heard by anyone who could listen. The list of people confirmed to possess this ability is short, and the shape of that list is itself a kind of clue. Gol D. Roger, the man who conquered the Grand Line and reached the final island, could hear the voice of all things. It was central to how he was able to do what no one else had done, because it allowed him to read the road poneglyphs that point toward the end of the world and to understand the messages left in the stones along the way. Roger's ability to hear the voice was not something he advertised. It was a private thing, a strangeness he carried, and the people who traveled with him came to understand that their captain was hearing things the rest of them could not. The second great possessor of the ability in the present day is Monkey D. Luffy. This is one of the quiet inheritances that the story has built between Roger and Luffy without ever making a loud announcement of it. There are moments scattered across the series where Luffy hears something that no one around him hears. He hears the voice of an enormous ancient creature and understands its pain. He hears something speak from a place where nothing should be speaking, and he reacts to it while everyone around him stands confused. Luffy himself does not seem to fully grasp what he is doing. He is not a scholar, and he has never tried to understand his own ability in any analytical way. He simply hears things, the way Roger heard things, and the resemblance between them in this one specific and mysterious capacity is one of the threads Oda has used to bind the two captains together across the gap of a generation. There are others. A young lord from the land of Wano can hear the voice of an ancient being that walks the sea. A certain swordsman long ago was able to communicate with a creature across an impossible distance. And the pattern that emerges when you place all of these people side by side is strange and quietly beautiful. The voice of all things does not belong to the strongest fighters or the cleverest minds or the most powerful rulers. It belongs to a scattered handful of people across history who seem more than anything else to be open, people who listen, people whose hearts are turned toward the world in a way that lets the world speak back to them. It is less a weapon than a kind of receptivity, and the fact that Roger had it and Luffy has it suggests that the men destined to reach the end of the world are not chosen for their power, but for their capacity to hear what the world has been trying to say all along. What remains unsolved is the deepest part. Where does the voice of all things come from? Why can stones speak? And what does it mean that an object can hold a voice? The poneglyphs were made from a material so durable that nothing in the present world can scratch them, and they were inscribed by a civilization that has been erased, and yet they still speak to anyone able to listen, which means that the people of the ancient kingdom found a way to preserve not just information, but voice itself, to press the act of speaking into stone so that it could be heard 800 years later by someone not yet born. That is a kind of technology or a kind of magic that the story has not explained, and the voice does not seem limited to the poneglyphs. Luffy has heard living creatures and ancient beings, things that have their own present tense voices crying out across the world, which suggests that the voice of all things is not merely a way of reading old records, but a way of perceiving a layer of reality that is always there, a constant quiet speech underneath the surface of everything, audible only to the rare few who are born tuned to its frequency. The world, in other words, is talking all the time. Almost no one can hear it. and the ones who can are the ones the story keeps guiding toward its center. Our next mystery walks. It has walked for 1,000 years, slowly, across an endless ocean, carrying a country on its back and a crime in its memory that it cannot bring itself to name. Somewhere in the New World, moving through the water at a pace too vast to seem like movement at all, there is an elephant the size of an island. Its name is Zunesha, and on its back, gripped into its hide by enormous roots and built up over centuries, sits an entire country called Zu, with its own people and its own forests and its own ancient history. Zunesha has been walking for 1,000 years. It does not stop. It does not arrive anywhere. It simply moves endlessly across the surface of the sea, an animal so large that ships sailing near it might mistake its legs for towers of rock rising out of the water, so large that the people living on its back went centuries without fully understanding that the ground beneath them was alive. The strangeness of Zunesha begins with its scale and then deepens into something far more troubling. This is not simply a big animal. It is an animal that has been alive for at least 1,000 years, which is impossible by any natural measure, an age that places it among the oldest living things in the entire world. And it is walking with a purpose that it will not explain and apparently is not free to abandon. When Zunesha is finally spoken to directly in the story, when a person who can hear its voice asks it the obvious question, the answer is one of the most haunting lines in the series. Zunesha says that it has been walking for over 1,000 years, and when asked why it walks, why it never stops, why it carries this burden across the endless water, Zunesha says only that it committed a crime long ago, and that it walks because of that crime, and that it has been forbidden from doing anything else. It will not say what the crime was. This is the heart of the mystery, the thing that has kept readers turning the moment over in their minds for years. An animal older than nearly anything else alive, an animal that has been walking in punishment for a millennium, an animal that carries on its back a country whose people have their own deep connection to the suppressed history of the world, and the one thing it will not reveal is the nature of its own guilt. The timing alone is enough to make the hair on your arms stand up. 1,000 years of walking places, the beginning of Zunesha's punishment, somewhere around the Void Century, the very era that the world government has spent 800 years erasing, the era whose truth is the engine of the entire plot. Whatever Zunesha did, it did during the time that no one is allowed to remember. And so, its silence is not just the silence of a guilty creature. It may be the silence of a witness, a living being that was present for the thing the world has forbidden, carrying the knowledge of it across the centuries, the same way it carries the country on its back, unable to set either burden down. There is a detail that makes Zunesha even stranger, and it arrives in a single devastating moment. When an enemy threatens the country on Zunesha's back, the great elephant does not act on its own initiative to defend itself. It waits, and the person who can hear its voice realizes, with sudden horror and pity, that Zunesha is waiting for permission, that this creature the size of an island has been so thoroughly bound by its punishment that it will not even raise its trunk to defend the people living on it, unless it is commanded to do so by someone with the right to command it. Then the command comes, and Zunesha lifts its trunk, and with a single motion it destroys an attacking fleet, revealing in that instant a power as vast as its body, a power it has been holding in check for 1,000 years, out of obedience to a sentence whose terms we do not fully understand. It is one thing to imagine an ancient creature wandering freely. It is another, far sadder thing to realize that this gentle giant has been waiting 1,000 years for someone to give it permission to protect the only home it has. What was the crime? Who passed the sentence? And who has the authority to command a creature like this? Why does an animal need to be punished by being made to walk forever? And what would happen if it ever stopped? These questions remain open, and Oda has fed them just enough to keep them alive, without ever satisfying them. The connection between Zunesha and the Void Century, the link between the elephant and the suppressed people who live on its back, the hint that its crime and its punishment are tied to the same ancient war that produced the poneglyphs and the empty throne and the will the world fears most. All of it suggests that Zunesha is not a side curiosity, but a living monument to whatever happened 1,000 years ago. A piece of the truth that survived in flesh rather than in stone, walking patiently across the sea, carrying its country and its guilt and its silence toward a moment of revelation that has not yet come. Our next mystery is an object, and like so many of the strangest things in this story, it sits hidden inside the Holy Land, at the top of the world, in the same place where the empty throne keeps its secret. Deep within Pangaea Castle, in a chamber that very few people are ever permitted to enter, there is a straw hat. It is enormous, far too large for any ordinary person to wear, and it is kept with the kind of care that a civilization reserves for the things it considers most sacred or most dangerous. It is preserved, protected, hidden away from the eyes of the world, and the moment a reader first sees it, the recognition lands like a soft shock because it is unmistakably the same shape as the hat that has sat on Luffy's head since the first chapter of the series. To understand why a giant straw hat hidden in the most secret room of the world government is one of the weirdest mysteries in One Piece, you have to hold a few things in your mind at once. The straw hat that Luffy wears is not just any hat. It belonged to Shanks, who received it from Roger, which already makes it a thread connecting Luffy to the man who conquered the world. But the design of that hat, the simple wide-brimmed shape with its band of color, goes back much further than Roger. It is the same design worn by a figure from the Void Century, a man the story calls Joy Boy, who lived 800 years ago during the era the world government has worked so hard to erase, and it is the same design associated with a sun god from ancient legend, a figure of liberation called Nika, whose story was told to slaves and oppressed people for centuries as a promise that someone would one day come to set them free. So here is the strangeness laid out plainly. The same kind of hat appears on a present-day pirate, on the legendary king of the pirates before him, on a figure from a war 800 years ago, and on a god of freedom from the oldest legends in the world. And a giant version of that same hat is kept locked away in the deepest, most protected room of the very government that destroyed the Void Century and erased Joy Boy from history. The world government does not preserve things by accident. It does not keep an enormous straw hat in its holiest chamber for centuries, unless that hat means something, unless it is connected to the thing the government most fears, unless it is, in some way the story has not yet fully explained, a relic of the exact history that the empty throne was built to bury. What most fans find most unsettling about the giant hat is the question of who it was made for. A straw hat that size would not fit a human being. It would fit a giant, or something larger than a giant, which has led readers to wonder whether Joy Boy himself was a being of enormous size, or whether the hat is symbolic rather than functional, a monument in the shape of a hat rather than a hat anyone ever wore. Oda has confirmed through the structure of the story that the giant hat and Luffy's hat are connected in meaning, that the two objects belong to the same lineage of significance, but he has not explained the nature of that connection, and the silence around it has the particular quality of a secret being saved for exactly the right moment. When that moment comes, when the story finally explains why the government keeps a giant straw hat in the room next to its hidden ruler, it will almost certainly explain a great deal else along with it, because this single strange object sits at the intersection of nearly every major mystery the story has been building. The hat connects Luffy to Roger, to Joy Boy to Nika. It connects the present to the void century, and it connects the cheerful boy in a coastal village to the most carefully guarded secret at the center of the world's most powerful institution. It has been sitting in that room the whole time, waiting, the way the throne has been waiting, the way the poneglyphs have been waiting, for the reader who is paying close enough attention to ask the right question. The next mystery does not belong to the sea at all. It belongs to the sky, and beyond the sky, to a dead and silent place that the people of One Piece almost never look toward, even though the answer to one of the story's oldest puzzles may be written across its surface. There is a moon in the world of One Piece, the same as in ours, and for most of the series it is simply a moon, a pale circle hanging over the ocean, a source of light for night scenes, and nothing more. But Oda, who never wastes a setting, did something with that moon that almost no casual reader registers, because he did it in the margins, in a side story tucked between chapters, in the kind of place where a creator hides the things he is not ready to say out loud. He revealed that the moon was once inhabited, that there was a civilization there, long ago, a people who lived on the lunar surface in a city that has since fallen into ruin. And he revealed that this lunar civilization, faced with the failure of its own world, came down to the earth below in search of the resources it needed to survive. The implications of this are quietly enormous. The people who came down from the moon are linked in the story's hidden history to the winged people of the Sky Islands, the ones who live above the clouds and who have small wings on their backs that mark them as different from the people of the blue sea below. The connection suggests that the Sky Islanders are descendants of the lunar migrants, that the strange winged people floating above the world are the children of a civilization that fell from the actual moon, carrying their origins in the feathers on their backs without fully remembering where those origins lay. And the murals that depict this ancient lunar city show something else, something that ties this mystery to several others we will visit tonight. They show automata, mechanical beings, robots, built by the moon people, walking among them in a city that existed before recorded history. This is where the moon stops being a piece of set decoration and becomes one of the weirdest threads in the entire story. Because there are ancient robots elsewhere in One Piece, there is a long dormant mechanical giant connected to the Void Century, a piece of technology so advanced that the present day world cannot replicate it, a relic of a civilization that knew how to build things that the modern world has forgotten how to build. And if the moon people built robots, and the moon people came down to the earth, then the advanced ancient technology scattered through the world may have its origin not on the earth at all, but above it, in the ruins of a civilization that exhausted its own world and descended to ours. The ancient kingdom that the world government fears, the one that possessed knowledge and weapons, and a way of life that the victors found so threatening that they erased it from history, may be connected to these lunar travelers, or descended from them, or built upon the technology they brought down with them when they fell. None of this has been spelled out. It lives in murals and side stories, and quiet visual rhymes between distant parts of the world, the kind of connections Oda plants and then leaves alone for a decade before returning to them. But the questions it raises are the strangest in the series. Was the advanced civilization of the Void Century born from people who came down from the moon? Are the winged people of the sky and the robots of the ancient world two branches of the same lost lineage? And what happened on the moon, in that ruined city, that drove an entire civilization to abandon the heavens and come searching through the earth below for whatever it had lost? The moon hangs over every night scene in One Piece, pale and silent, and almost no one in the story ever looks up at it and wonders. But the answer to where this world's deepest technology came from may be written across its dead surface, in the ruins of a city that fell long before anyone alive was born. We have spoken of the robots twice now, in passing, as a thread connecting the moon to the ancient world. The next mystery is the robot itself. A mechanical giant that slept for centuries beneath a frozen island and then, with no warning and no explanation, opened its eyes. On a cold island in the New World, in a place buried under snow and largely forgotten by the world, there has stood for centuries the body of an enormous robot. It is far larger than a human, built of metal that has survived the long years without crumbling, and for most of the modern era, it did nothing at all. It simply stood or lay dormant and silent, a piece of inexplicable ancient technology in a world that had long since lost the ability to build such things. The people who lived near it treated it the way people treat any ancient ruin too large to move and too strange to understand. They left it alone. It became part of the landscape, a fixed and lifeless thing, a giant that had clearly once been capable of motion but had been still for so long that no one alive remembered it ever being otherwise. And then, in the present day of the story, it moved. With no apparent cause, after centuries of stillness, the ancient robot reactivated, its eyes lit, its enormous body stirred. A machine built during or before the Void Century, a machine that no living engineer knows how to construct or even fully understand, came back to life on its own as though something far away had sent it a signal, as though it had been waiting all this time for a condition to be met that was finally met. The moment is brief and strange and largely unexplained, and it has fueled years of speculation because a dormant ancient weapon waking up on its own is exactly the kind of event that suggests the story's hidden machinery is beginning to turn. What makes this robot one of the weirdest mysteries is everything it implies and refuses to confirm. It implies that the ancient kingdom possessed technology centuries ahead of the modern world, machines that could think or respond or act, built by hands that have been dust for 800 years and yet whose work still functions. It implies a connection to the lunar automata, to the moon people who built mechanical beings in their fallen city, raising the possibility that this robot and the others like it are the inheritance of a civilization that came down from the sky, and it implies that these ancient machines are not merely relics, but participants, that they were built for a purpose that did not end when their builders died, that they have been waiting through the centuries for something, and that the something has finally begun to arrive. There is a detail that elevates the mystery from technological to almost spiritual. The ancient machines of this world, when they speak at all, do not speak of power or conquest or war. They speak a name. They reach back across 800 years of silence, and they say the name of the figure from the void century, the man in the straw hat, the one called Joy Boy, the one whose return has been promised and waited for across centuries. The robots seem to have been built by people who were waiting for Joy Boy, or who believed in his return, or who designed their creations to recognize him when he came again. Which means the reactivation of the ancient robot is not just a machine malfunctioning after a long sleep. It may be a machine keeping a promise, a piece of the void century built by people long dead, opening its eyes at last because the thing it was made to wait for has finally come back into the world. What that robot is for, what it was built to do, and what it will do now that it is awake, the story has not yet revealed. But a weapon of the lost civilization waking up on its own, speaking the name of the figure the world fears most, is the kind of mystery that does not stay quiet for long. The next mystery is about time itself, which is the one thing in this story that is supposed to move in only one direction. There is a woman in the history of One Piece who did not obey that rule. Her name was Toki, and she walked out of the distant past and into the present by stepping over the years the way the rest of us step over a stream. Toki possessed one of the rarest and strangest devil fruit powers ever shown in the series, the ability to leap forward through time. Not backward, never backward, a detail that the story treats as an iron law. She could send herself and others into the future across years or decades, or even centuries, arriving in a later age exactly as she had been when she left, untouched by the time she had skipped. To the people who waited and aged through those years, she would simply vanish from one moment and reappear, unchanged in another. To Toki herself, the journey was instant. She closed her eyes in one era and opened them in another, having lived none of the time between. What makes Toki one of the weirdest figures in the story is not the power itself, but where she came from. She arrived in the land of Wano, married into its ruling family, and lived a life there, and for a long time she seemed like simply an unusual woman with an unusual ability. But she let slip, in quiet moments, that she was not from that age at all. She said that she had come from a very long time ago. The story has strongly implied that Toki originated in the distant past, possibly as far back as the Void Century itself, the very era the world has spent 800 years erasing, and that she traveled forward through the centuries in a series of leaps, never aging, watching the world change around her in sudden jumps, arriving at last in a Wano that her own ancient origins were destined to shape. Sit with the strangeness of that for a moment. If Toki came from the Void Century, then she was a living person from the Forbidden Era, walking around in the present, carrying inside her the memories of the time that no one is allowed to remember. She would have seen the ancient kingdom, or its fall, or the world as it was before the world government erased it. She would have known things that scholars have died trying to recover, things written on poneglyphs in a language almost no one can read, things that entire islands have been destroyed for studying. And she carried all of it forward across the centuries, not in stone, not in code, but in her own ordinary human memory, leaping over the years like stepping stones, a witness to the lost world, moving quietly through the ages toward a purpose the story has only begun to reveal. Toki's final act with her power was an act of love and of strategy, and it deepens the mystery rather than resolving it. When her family was destroyed and her son and his loyal retainers were in danger, she used her ability one last time to send them 20 years into the future, sacrificing herself to give them a chance to land in an age where they might finally set things right. She did not go with them. She stayed behind in her own time and met her end there, having spent her last use of an almost limitless power, not on escape, but on the future of the people she loved. And the questions she leaves behind are some of the most tantalizing in the series. Where exactly did she come from? What did she see in the lost century? Why did she travel forward at all, leaping across the ages, as though she were not fleeing the past so much as searching for a particular moment in the future, a moment she somehow knew was coming, a moment she gave everything to reach? The next mystery is one that nearly every reader encounters in the very first arc and then simply accepts, the way you accept the rules of a dream while you are still inside it. It is the question of the devil fruits themselves, where they come from, what they are, and why the sea of all things hates them so completely. The devil fruits are the source of nearly every extraordinary power in One Piece. Eat one, and you gain an ability that defies the ordinary rules of the world. You might become able to stretch your body like rubber, or turn into flame, or pass through walls, or command the weather. The fruits are rare and immensely valuable, and the powers they grant are as varied as imagination itself. But for all their importance, the most basic questions about them have never been answered. No one knows where devil fruits come from. No one knows how they are made, or whether they are made at all, or whether they simply grow somewhere on trees that no one has found. They appear in the world like gifts from nowhere, ordinary looking pieces of fruit, marked only by strange swirling patterns on their skin, holding inside them powers that can reshape the fate of nations. And then there is the price. Every devil fruit comes with the same curse, no matter what power it grants. The moment a person eats one, the sea rejects them. They lose the ability to swim. Submerge a devil fruit user in water, especially the seawater of the ocean, and their strength drains away, their body goes limp, and they become as helpless as a drowning child. For a world that is almost entirely ocean, a world where everyone of importance travels by ship across endless water, this is a curse of extraordinary cruelty. The very people granted the greatest powers are the ones the sea most wants to swallow. A man who can turn his whole body into fire cannot save himself from a quiet pond. A woman who can sprout limbs anywhere she wishes cannot keep her head above the waves. Why? This is the mystery that hides underneath the entire power system of the story, and the story has only ever hinted at the answer. There is a substance in this world called sea stone, a rare mineral that emits the same energy as the sea itself, and it nullifies devil fruit powers on contact, which tells us that the sea's rejection of the fruits is not about water in any ordinary sense, but about something the sea contains, some quality or force or presence that the fruits are fundamentally opposed to. The fruits are called devil fruits. The sea hates them, and a brilliant scientist within the story has theorized that the fruits represent something like the embodiment of human dreams, the shape that the desire to transcend ordinary limits takes when it crystallizes into the physical world, which would make them not gifts from nowhere, but expressions of the human will to become more than human. If that is true, then the sea's hatred of them becomes almost mythological. The natural world, the ancient and indifferent ocean, pushing back against the audacity of any creature that reaches for a power it was not born with. There is one more piece of strangeness, and it is the strangest of all. When a person who has eaten a devil fruit dies, the power does not die with them. The fruit, in a sense, comes back. The next fruit of the same type appears somewhere in the world, growing on some ordinary tree, ready to be found and eaten by someone new, so that a power that vanished from the world the moment its owner died returns to it, the moment a new fruit ripens. The powers are immortal, even though their users are not. They circulate endlessly through the centuries, passing from body to body across generations, the same abilities reappearing again and again, as though the world contains a fixed set of dreams that can never be destroyed, only passed on. Where they go in between, how they know to reappear, what carries the power from a dead body to a distant tree, the story has never explained. It is one of the oldest and quietest mysteries in all of One Piece, hiding in plain sight inside the first power the reader ever encounters. If you are still drifting somewhere between waking and sleep, the next mystery is a gentle one, a small and tender strangeness rather than a vast and frightening one. It is the question of whether a ship can have a soul. In the world of One Piece, ships are not merely vehicles. The people who sail them speak to them, name them, love them, and grieve for them, and the story takes that love seriously in a way that very few stories do. Out of that love comes one of the most quietly beautiful mysteries in the series, the idea of the Klabauterman, a spirit that is said to be born inside a ship when its crew loves it enough. According to the old sailor's lore woven through the story, a vessel that has been cared for and cherished, that has carried its crew faithfully through storms and battles, can develop a kind of soul of its own, a small spirit, a guardian that lives inside the wood and watches over the people aboard. The Klabautermann is not a creature you can ordinarily see. It reveals itself only in rare moments, usually when the ship is in danger or near the end of its life, and even then only to people whose hearts are open enough to perceive it. The story shows this spirit appearing as a small figure, performing tiny acts of protection and repair, doing what it can to keep the ship and its crew safe. A quiet expression of the bond between sailors and the vessel that carries them. And in one of the most genuinely moving sequences in the entire series, a ship that has been loved deeply and damaged beyond saving is given the chance to speak, to thank its crew for the journey they shared, to say goodbye. The spirit of the ship, born from the love poured into it across countless voyages, gets to express its gratitude before it is finally laid to rest, and the moment lands with a weight that has made readers cry for years because it treats an inanimate object as something that genuinely lived, that genuinely felt, that genuinely loved them back. The mystery, the strange and unanswered thing underneath the tenderness, is whether the Klabautermann is real within the world of the story, or whether it is a beautiful kind of projection, the crew's love taking a shape their grief can perceive. The story never quite tells you. It shows you the spirit, it lets the ship speak, and it leaves open the question of what exactly you are seeing. Is the ship truly alive in some way the ordinary world cannot measure? Has the love of its crew genuinely called a soul into being inside the wood? Or is the Klabautermann the form that a deep bond takes when it finally has to be released? A way for the people who loved a thing to say goodbye to it properly. The story holds both possibilities open at once, and that openness is the heart of its gentleness. In a world full of terrible weapons and hidden rulers and erased centuries, here's a small mystery that asks only whether the things we love can love us back, and answers it softly with a yes that it never bothers to prove. The next mystery is the largest in scale of anything we have touched tonight, and also one of the most recent to surface. It is the possibility that the entire world of One Piece is slowly drowning, and that it has happened before. For most of the series, the geography of the world is simply the stage on which everything happens. There is a great land mass called the Red Line that circles the globe, and a perpendicular band of ocean called the Grand Line, and the four blue seas and the sky islands above, and that arrangement is treated as fixed and permanent, the natural shape of the world. But late in the story, a brilliant and troubled scientist who had spent his life studying the deepest truths of this world left behind a message, a final broadcast meant to be heard by everyone, and in it he said something that reframed the entire planet. He said that the sea level has been rising for centuries. He said that islands and lands that once stood above the water have been swallowed slowly across the long years, sinking beneath a sea that never stops climbing. And he warned that this process is not finished, that the world as it exists now is not the whole world, only the part that has not yet gone under, and that in time the rising sea may swallow far more. The implications ripple outward in every direction. If the sea has been rising for centuries, then the world was once larger than it is now. There were lands that are gone, civilizations that lived on ground that is now ocean floor, histories that did not just get erased by the world government, but were physically drowned, sunk beneath the waves where no scholar could ever reach them. The ancient kingdom that the world fears, the one whose destruction began the void century, may lie not only buried in forbidden history, but literally beneath the sea, its ruins resting in the dark water far below the keels of every ship that sails over them without knowing what lies underneath. And the strangeness deepens when you realize that the rising of the sea may not be a natural process at all. There are hints that it is connected to the Great War 800 years ago, that something done in that ancient conflict began the slow drowning of the world that the sea has been climbing ever since as a consequence of whatever weapon or catastrophe ended the previous age. What makes this one of the weirdest mysteries, rather than simply the saddest, is the question of intention. Is the world drowning by accident, the slow aftermath of an ancient wound? Or is it drowning by design, the deliberate result of a weapon meant to reshape the world by raising the sea? The story has placed enormous ancient weapons at the center of its mythology, weapons capable of destruction on a planetary scale, and the possibility that one of them is responsible for the slow submersion of the world turns the rising sea from a backdrop into a clue. The world you have been reading about, the islands, in the oceans, and the long voyages, may be the surface of a much older and much larger world, most of which has already gone under, with the rest following slowly, century by century, toward a sea that is patiently reclaiming everything. And the final island, at the end of the grand line, the place where the treasure waits, may be one of the last pieces of the old world still standing above the water, a remnant of the age before the drowning, waiting for someone to reach it before it too disappears. The next mystery is wrapped in fog, and it has swallowed more ships than anyone has ever been able to count. It is a region of the sea where the air itself seems to refuse to clear, where the water lies still and gray beneath a mist that never lifts, and where vessels enter and are simply never seen again. It is called the Florian Triangle, and it is one of the most genuinely unsettling places in the world of One Piece. The fog there is permanent and thick enough to hide an entire ship at close range, and the silence is the kind that presses against the ears. Sailors who pass through it report seeing ghost ships drifting in the mist, derelict vessels with no living crew aboard, their decks empty, their sails torn, moving slowly through the fog with no one at the helm. Crews that enter the triangle sometimes emerge changed or do not emerge at all. The region has a reputation across the seas as a place where the ordinary rules of the world grow thin, where the living and the dead seem to drift close to one another, where a ship can vanish completely and leave behind only stories. Part of the mystery of the Florian Triangle was explained when the story finally took its characters into the heart of it. There they found a vast haunted ship, an island of a vessel ruled by a man who had stolen the shadows of countless people and used them to animate an army of the dead, which accounted for some of the ghost ships and some of the missing crews and some of the dread that hung over the region. But the explanation did not cover everything, and that is what keeps the Florian Triangle on the list of unsolved mysteries. The fog was there before that haunted ship arrived. The disappearances stretch back further than any single villain could account for. The region's reputation as a place where ships vanish predates the events the story actually showed, which means that whatever made the Florian Triangle a place of dread in the first place is still unexplained, still sitting out there in the permanent mist, still waiting. The story drew this region with obvious care, giving it a real and lasting atmosphere of unease. And Oda did not invent the idea from nothing. The Florian Triangle echoes the real world legends of regions where ships and aircraft are said to vanish without a trace, the patches of ocean that human beings have always treated with superstition and fear, the places on the map that sailors have always preferred to sail around. By building such a region into his world and then only partly explaining it, Oda left behind a piece of deliberate strangeness, a corner of the map that stays foggy even after the reader has been there. What lies in the rest of that mist, beyond the one haunted ship the story explored, why the fog never lifts, what makes the Florian Triangle a place where the dead and the living drift so close together? These questions were never fully answered, and the region remains exactly what it was when the characters first sailed into it, a quiet, gray, fog-bound mystery in the middle of the sea. If you are still awake somewhere in the middle of all this, drifting but not yet gone, maybe subscribe before you drift off, and tell me what time it is where you are watching from tonight. The next mystery is about a place that the world tried to delete, an island that was wiped not only from the present, but from history itself, so thoroughly that for decades almost no one knew it had ever existed. There was an island called God Valley, and something happened there a long time ago that the world has worked very hard to forget. The event is known in the fragments that survive as the God Valley Incident, and it took place decades before the present day of the story, in a time when some of the most powerful figures in the modern world were young. What is known is that an extraordinary collision of powers occurred on that island. A monstrous pirate crew, perhaps the most dangerous assembly of individual threats the world had ever seen, was present there. So was the future king of the pirates. So was a legendary marine who would become one of the great heroes of his generation. And the clash between these forces was so enormous, so consequential, that it reshaped the balance of the world. And then the island disappeared, not metaphorically. God Valley is gone from the maps. It vanished from the records. For a long stretch of the story, the very existence of the island was a kind of rumor, a name spoken in fragments by people old enough to remember a time the world had tried to erase. The deliberate disappearance of an entire island from history is, by now, a familiar move in One Piece, the same erasure the world performed on the Void Century, the same silence imposed on anything the powerful decide is too dangerous to be remembered. But the strangeness of God Valley is that the world worked this hard to bury an event that happened in relatively recent history within living memory, which suggests that whatever occurred there touched on the same deep secrets that the Void Century holds, that God Valley was not just a battle, but a place where something forbidden was exposed. As the story has slowly returned to God Valley, it has begun to reveal the shape of that forbidden thing. The island was connected to the cruelest practices of the world's ruling class, the place where the most powerful people in the world indulged in their darkest entertainments, a setting for human cruelty on a scale that the world preferred to pretend had never happened. The figures who emerged from God Valley carried its secrets forward into the present, and some of the great mysteries of the modern story, the origins of certain pirates, the rise of certain powers, the hidden connections between people who seem to have nothing to do with one another, all trace back to that vanished island. God Valley is a knot where many threads tie together, and the story has been slowly loosening it, revealing that the island was erased not because of a single battle, but because of what that battle exposed about the people who rule the world. What exactly happened there? Who was truly responsible? And why the truth of it was so dangerous that an entire island had to be removed from history. The story is still in the process of revealing, but the very fact of its erasure tells you that God Valley sits close to the heart of everything the world has been trying to hide. We return now to the top of the world, to the men who kneel before the hidden ruler in the empty throne room, because the five elders hold a mystery of their own, and it is one of the strangest the story has revealed. They do not seem to age. They have apparently held their positions, the same five faces, for a very long time, longer than any ordinary human life should allow, and the implication that the story has slowly built around them is that these men have been alive since the very founding of the world government, 800 years ago. For most of the series, the five elders appear as exactly what they seem to be: five old men in formal robes who sit at the top of the government and make its gravest decisions. They are clearly powerful in the sense that all rulers are powerful, commanding armies and agencies and the obedience of nations. But they were drawn as old men, and old men are mortal, and readers assumed for a long time that the elders were simply the current holders of an ancient office, the latest in a long line of letters stretching back through the centuries. What the story eventually suggested, and then began to confirm, is far stranger. These are not the latest holders of the office. They may be the original holders. The same five individuals who established the world government after the Great War of the Void Century may still be sitting in that room, 800 years later, unchanged, having never died, having never been replaced, having simply continued decade after decade and century after century, while the entire rest of the world lived and died and forgot. If that is true, then the five elders are among the oldest beings in the world, rivaled only by the hidden figure they kneel to, and by the ancient creature that walks the sea carrying its country and its crime. They would be living survivors of the Void Century, men who were present at the founding, men who remember the war and the kingdom that was destroyed, and the truth that the world has spent 8 centuries burying. Their longevity is not just a strange biological fact, it makes them witnesses. Everything the scholars of the world have died trying to recover, everything written in stone and hidden in forbidden language, these five men simply remember because they were there. The silence the world enforces around the Void Century is, for the elders, not silence at all. It is memory. They are keeping quiet about a history they personally lived through. How they have survived this long is the deepest part of the mystery, and the story has only begun to hint at it. There are suggestions that the elders possess powers far beyond what their human appearance implies, that the frail old men in the robes are something other than they seem, that beneath the surface of their ordinary age lies something ancient and inhuman. Whether their long life comes from a devil fruit, from some lost technique of the ancient world, from the same source that sustains the hidden ruler, the story is still unfolding. But the basic strangeness is established. The world is governed at its highest level by a small group of men who do not die, who have ruled an unbroken continuity since before recorded history, who remember the thing that everyone else has been forced to forget, and who have spent 800 years making sure that no one ever learns what they know. The empty throne was a lie about who rules. The five elders are a lie about how long they have ruled. And underneath both lies sits the same secret, the truth of the void century, guarded across the centuries by beings who refuse to die and refuse to remember out loud. The next mystery is a disappearance, a quiet vanishing of a woman and a group of children that has never been fully explained, and it sits underneath the origin of one of the most powerful pirates in the world. There was a woman known as Mother Carmel, and to the world she presented herself as a figure of mercy. She ran a home for children, an orphanage where the unwanted and abandoned could find shelter, and she wore the bearing of a holy woman, a protector of the weak, a mother to those who had no one. But the kindness was a mask. Behind the image of the merciful caretaker, Carmel was something far darker, a woman with a long and hidden history of trafficking in children, of gathering up the vulnerable not to protect them, but to sell them, of using the appearance of charity to disguise a trade in human lives. She had connections to the highest and most secret levels of the world's power, and her orphanage was less a refuge than a holding pen, a place where children were collected before being sold to those who wanted them. Into this home came a girl who would grow into one of the most fearsome figures in the world, an enormous and powerful child with an appetite and a strength that frightened everyone around her. Carmel took the girl in, and for a time the holy woman and the monstrous child formed a strange bond, the caretaker and her most dangerous charge. And then, on the day of the girl's 6th birthday, something happened that the story has never directly shown and has only ever allowed the reader to infer. Carmel vanished. So did all the other children in the home. On that single day, in the middle of a celebration, the woman and every child around her simply disappeared, leaving behind no bodies, no explanation, nothing but an empty space where a group of people had been, and a single enormous girl sitting alone amid the remains of a feast, with no memory of what had happened. The implication, drawn with horror and restraint, is that the girl in her uncontrollable hunger consumed them, that in a blackout of appetite she devoured Carmel and the children, the woman who had taken her in and all the others who had shared the home, and that she emerged from that day with no memory of it, having erased the event from her own mind even as she carried its consequences forward for the rest of her life. And the strangeness deepens because in the aftermath of the disappearance, the girl somehow gained a power she had not possessed before, an ability over souls that had belonged to Carmel, as though the woman's very power had passed into the child along with everything else that was lost that day. But the story has never confirmed the inference, and that is what keeps Mother Carmel on the list of unsolved mysteries. We never see what happened. We are shown the home, the celebration, the bond between the woman and the child, and then we are shown the empty aftermath, and the connecting moment is left in shadow. Did the girl truly devour them all? Did Carmel die, or did she somehow survive and slip away, faking her own disappearance for reasons of her own? Where did Carmel truly come from, and what were the full extent of her connections to the powers that rule the world? The disappearance of Mother Carmel and the children is one of those moments where Oda shows you the edges of something terrible and lets your imagination supply the center, and the terror of it lives precisely in what he chose not to draw, in the empty space where an answer should be, in a vanishing that has never been explained. The next mystery takes us to a land of giants, and to the warrior god they have followed for longer than anyone can remember. Somewhere in the world, there is a country called Elbaf, the homeland of the giant race, a place spoken of throughout the story with reverence and longing long before any of the main characters ever set foot in it. The giants of One Piece are an ancient people, enormous and long lived, with a culture built around honor, strength, and the settling of disputes through honest combat. They live by a warrior's code, and at the center of that code stands their god, a figure named Elbaf, after whom their homeland is named. The giants believe that their god watches over their battles, that a duel fought honestly is a duel observed by the divine, and that the outcome of such a fight carries a weight that goes beyond the two warriors involved. Two giants who carry a disagreement will fight it out, sometimes for years, sometimes for decades, trusting that their god will see which of them is in the right, and they will hold to that trust with a devotion that the rest of the world finds almost incomprehensible. What makes Elbaf one of the weirdest and most intriguing mysteries is how deeply it seems to be woven into the ancient history of the world, and how little of that history the story has actually revealed. The giants are old, far older as a people than the modern nations, and there are hints scattered through the story that they were present for the great events of the Void Century, that giants fought in the ancient wars, that some served the powers that became the world government, while others stood against them. The land of Elbaf has been treated, across the whole run of the series, as a place of enormous significance, a destination that the story has been building toward for a very long time, a country whose secrets are tied to the deepest layers of the world's lost history. Characters speak of Elbaf the way pilgrims speak of a holy land, and the anticipation that has gathered around it suggests that whatever is revealed, there will reshape a great deal of what the reader thought they understood. And then there is the god himself. Who or what is Elbaf? Is the warrior god of the giants merely a figure of faith, a belief that gives shape to a culture? Or is there something real beneath the legend, some ancient truth that the giants have preserved in the form of a god, while the rest of the world forgot it? The story has a habit of taking its myths seriously, of revealing that the old legends and the dismissed beliefs contain hidden truths, that the gods and heroes of forgotten faiths turn out to be connected to the real history the world has buried. The sun god of the oppressed turned out to be woven into the very center of the story. It would be entirely in keeping with the way Oda works for the warrior god of the giants to turn out to be something more than a belief. a real piece of the ancient world preserved in the faith of an ancient people, waiting in their homeland for the moment the story finally arrives to explain it. The next mystery fell out of a clear sky and destroyed a kingdom in an instant, and almost no one in the world was allowed to understand what they had seen. It is the fire that came from above, the weapon that the hidden ruler used to erase an entire nation from the surface of the world without warning and without mercy. There is a power kept at the very top of the world, guarded by the figure in the empty throne, that the rest of the world does not know exists. It is a kind of fire, an immense and ancient force, and when it was unleashed, it did not strike like an army or a fleet or any weapon the world understood. It came down from the heavens. A small and harmless kingdom, a place of no great strategic importance, found itself beneath a light in the sky, and then the light fell, and the kingdom was gone, not conquered, not occupied, erased, scoured from the earth in a single moment, the island and its people and its history wiped away so completely that the surrounding world barely registered what had happened, was barely allowed to register it before the official story closed over the event, like water over a stone. The strangeness of this fire is that it should not exist in the modern world at all. The story has been very clear that the present age has lost the ability to build the great weapons of the past, that the technology of the Void Century was so advanced that no one alive can replicate it, that the modern world is in many ways a diminished version of the ancient one, working with fragments of a knowledge it no longer fully possesses. And yet the hidden ruler at the top of the world commands a weapon capable of destroying a kingdom from the sky, a fire that seems to belong to the lost age rather than the present one, a power that connects the figure on the empty throne directly to the ancient world and its forgotten capabilities. The fire is a piece of the past that survived into the present, kept secret, kept ready, waiting in the hands of the one being old enough to remember how to use it. What this weapon is, where it came from, and how the ruler at the top of the world came to possess it are questions the story has only begun to approach. It may be one of the ancient weapons in another form. It may be the product of forbidden research, a fragment of lost technology that the world's scientists were forced to reconstruct in secret. It may be something older and stranger than either, a fire that has been kept burning at the heart of the world's power since the founding, fed and guarded across 8 centuries for exactly the kind of moment in which it was finally used. But the deepest unease the weapon produces is not about its origin, it is about its meaning. The figure at the top of the world, the one who has lived for 800 years, the one who sits in the throne that the world believes to be empty, has the power to erase an entire kingdom in an afternoon, and the will to use it on a target that posed no threat. The destruction was a demonstration, a reminder, a quiet exercise of a power that has been held in reserve for a very long time. And it tells the reader, in the most chilling way possible, that the secret rulers of this world are not merely keeping a historical truth hidden. They are keeping a weapon, and they are willing to use it. And the slow story of the world's drowning may not be the only way that the powerful have learned to make a kingdom disappear. The next mystery rings faintly from the bottom of the story and the top of the sky at the same time. It is the mystery of a golden city that was lost, and of a great bell that was meant to keep ringing so that the world would know the city still lived. Long ago, there was a city of gold, a place of wealth and beauty and deep history, and it was home to a people who were entrusted with one of the great stone records of the world, a poneglyph holding a piece of the forbidden history. The city was attacked, its people scattered and nearly destroyed, and in the chaos of war, a remarkable thing happened. A column of the sea itself, a violent upward surge of water, tore a portion of the land loose and flung it impossibly high, up past the clouds, into the sky, where it came to rest as an island floating above the world. The city, or a piece of it, was carried into the heavens, and the people who survived built their lives in the sky, far above the ocean where their ancestors had lived, carrying with them the memory of the home they had lost and the record they had been sworn to protect. At the heart of that lost city stood a great golden bell, and the bell was more than an ornament. It was the voice of the city, a sound meant to carry across the land, a tone that told everyone within hearing that the city was alive, that its people endured, that the home still stood. When the city fell and was carried into the sky, the bell fell silent, and for a long age it did not ring, and the descendants of the city's people fought a slow and bitter war in the clouds over the land that had once been their home, the memory of the silent bell hanging over all of it, like a grief that could not be put down. The dream that ran underneath that long sorrow was simple and almost unbearably tender. They wanted the bell to ring again. They wanted the great voice of the lost city to sound out once more across the sky, so that anyone still searching, anyone who still remembered, anyone who had been waiting through the long years for a sign that the city had not died, would hear it and know that it lived. What lifts this from a sad story into a genuine mystery is what was found alongside the bell and what was written there. The poneglyph that the city protected held a message, and on that ancient stone, beneath the forbidden history it was made to carry, someone left a more recent mark. The king of the pirates, who had passed through that place on his own journey to the end of the world, had read the stone and left words of his own behind, a message from one traveler to whoever might come after, a quiet acknowledgment across the years between the man who reached the end and the people who would one day follow. The lost city, the silent bell, the protected stone, the message left by the king of the pirates, all of it tied this floating remnant of an ancient tragedy directly into the central mystery of the world. And when the bell finally rang again, when its great golden voice sounded out across the skies after generations of silence, it was not only a city announcing that it still lived, it was a signal sent into the central current of the story, a tone struck in the present that resonated all the way back to the lost age, telling the world in a language older than words that the things that were buried are not gone, and that the people who were scattered are still, somewhere, ringing their bells and waiting to be heard. If you are still here with me, somewhere soft and quiet, the next mystery is one of music and bones, and it is among the gentlest strange things in the whole story. It is the mystery of a man who died and went on singing. There was a musician who sailed with a crew of good and gentle pirates, and when that crew met its end, set upon and poisoned in a stretch of fog-bound sea, the musician died along with all his friends. But he had eaten a devil fruit, one with a power so unusual that it did not save his life but did something stranger instead. It gave him a second chance at it. When he died, his soul did not pass on. It lingered, and it returned, searching the world for the body it had left behind. And when at last the wandering soul found its way back, the body it returned to was no longer a living man. It had been waiting too long in the fog. The flesh was gone. All that remained was bone. So the soul returned not to a body, but to a skeleton, and the musician woke again, alive in the only way left available to him, a living skeleton alone on a ship full of the bones of his dead friends, in the middle of a sea where no help would ever come. What he did then is the part that turns the strangeness into something that aches. He was alone. Genuinely, completely alone, in a way that few characters in any story have ever been, drifting for decades through a fog-bound sea with no living soul aboard, no crew, no friends, nothing but the skeletons of the people he had loved and the silence of the mist. And to keep himself from breaking entirely, he sang. He played the music he had always played alone, for no audience, in the dark, in the fog, year after year, decade after decade, holding on to a promise he had made to a friend and to the simple human refusal to let despair have the last word. The mystery of his power, of how a soul can leave a body and return to it, of where it went in the years between, of what it means that a soul can outlast the flesh it belonged to, is the kind of question the story raises and never closes. But the deeper mystery, the one that lingers, is the one his long solitude poses about the spirit itself. How does a person, or whatever a person becomes when only their soul and their bones remain, hold on to hope across decades of absolute loneliness? The story answers it the only way it ever answers its gentlest questions, not with an explanation, but with an image, a skeleton alone in the fog, playing a song into the dark, waiting for someone to finally come and hear it. The next mystery is a dream more than a place, a sea that may not exist at all, longed for by people who have never seen it and may never see it. It is called the All Blue, and it is the kind of mystery that stays soft, no matter how long you hold it. In the world of One Piece, the ocean is divided. There are four great seas, separated by the vast landmass that circles the world, and by the strange band of ocean that cuts across it, and each of the four seas has its own character, its own weather, its own kinds of fish. A creature that lives in the cold northern waters is not found in the warm southern ones. The life of each sea is distinct, shaped by the conditions of that part of the world, and a cook who works in one sea spends a lifetime learning the ingredients of that sea alone, never expecting to find the fish of distant waters swimming past his own shores. This is simply the way the world is arranged, the natural order of an ocean divided into separate realms. Okay, and yet there is a legend whispered among cooks and sailors of a place where that division does not hold. A single stretch of sea where the fish of all four oceans gather together, where the cold water creatures and the warm water creatures and the species of every distant shore swim side by side in the same water, where a cook could find every ingredient in the world in one place. It is called the All Blue, and to the people who believe in it, especially to cooks, it is the closest thing to paradise that the ocean could offer, a sea that holds the whole world's bounty in a single body of water. Most people treat it as a fairy tale, a beautiful impossibility, the kind of dream that a cook clings to precisely because it can never be confirmed. But the story has never declared the All Blue to be false. It has only left it hanging, unproven and unrefuted, a dream that has not yet been allowed to come true and has not yet been taken away. What makes the All Blue a genuine mystery rather than merely a hope is the question of what would have to be true for it to exist. The seas are divided for reasons rooted in the geography of the world, in the great landmass, and the strange currents, and the conditions that keep the four oceans separate. For a place to exist where all of their fish mingle freely, something about the ordinary order of the world would have to be suspended, some unique convergence of conditions, some place where the barriers between the seas dissolve. And this connects the cook's gentle dream to the harder mysteries we have wandered through tonight, to the strange geography of a world that may once have been larger, to the rising sea that has redrawn the map across the centuries, to the possibility that the arrangement of oceans the modern world takes for granted is not permanent and not original. The All Blue, if it exists, might be a remnant of an older arrangement of the world, or a place where the deep currents of the planet happen to meet, or a consequence of the same ancient forces that shaped everything else. Or it might be exactly what the cooks believe it to be, a paradise waiting at the end of a long journey, a sea that holds the whole world, real and findable for anyone with the patience and the faith to keep sailing toward it. The story has not said, it has only kept the dream alive, drifting somewhere out on the water, the way the best mysteries do. The next mystery is a man the world tried to make sure you would never hear about. His name was nearly erased, his crew was hidden, his ambition was buried, and for most of the story he existed only as a gap, a silence where one of the most important figures in the world's recent history should have been. Decades ago, before the present age of pirates began, there was a captain who assembled what may have been the single most dangerous crew the world has ever seen. He gathered together individuals who would each go on to become legends in their own right, monsters of strength and ambition, figures who would later command their own empires and terrify the world for the rest of their lives. Under this one captain, in his single crew, they sailed together, and the combined threat they represented was so great that it stood as a direct challenge to the order of the world itself. And the captain who held these monsters together, who commanded the loyalty, or at least the obedience of people who would never bow to anyone again, carried a particular initial hidden in the middle of his name, the same mysterious letter that connects so many of the story's most significant figures, the mark of the bloodline the world fears most. What set this captain apart from the pirates who came after him was the scale of his ambition. The pirates of the present age dream of finding the great treasure at the end of the world. They want to be the freest, the strongest, the one who reaches the final island. But this captain wanted something else. He did not want to find the treasure. He wanted to rule the world. He aimed his entire crew of monsters, not at the pursuit of freedom, but at the seizure of power, at toppling the existing order, and placing himself at the top of it, at becoming not the king of the pirates, but the king of everything. He was, in his ambition, a direct mirror of the hidden ruler at the top of the world, another figure reaching for total dominion, and the collision between his ambition and the world's existing power was so enormous that it took an unprecedented alliance to stop him. Two of the greatest figures of the age joining forces on a single island to bring him down, and then the world erased him. After his defeat, his name was scrubbed from the records, his crew's existence was hidden, the island where he fell was removed from the maps, and the entire episode was buried so thoroughly that for decades almost no one in the world knew he had ever lived. This is the strangeness that keeps him on the list of unsolved mysteries. The world does not erase ordinary enemies. It defeats them and moves on. It erased this man with the same thoroughness it used on the void century itself, which tells you that his existence threatened the world's secrets in some way that went beyond his ambition, that he knew something, or represented something, or carried something in his bloodline that made his memory as dangerous as his power had been. The world was not content to defeat him. It needed him forgotten. And the fact that it worked so hard to erase a man who lived within recent memory suggests that the thing he threatened to expose is the same thing the world has always been most afraid of, the truth buried in the lost century, the secret that the powerful would erase 100 enemies and 100 islands to keep hidden. The next mystery is a race of people, almost gone now, who once lived closer to the heavens than anyone else in the world, and whom the world hunted nearly to extinction, precisely because of how extraordinary they were. They are called the Lunarians, and the very name pulls at a thread we touched earlier tonight, the thread that leads up to the moon. The Lunarians were a people unlike any other in the world. They had dark skin and great black wings, and on their backs they carried a flame, a fire they could generate and control as naturally as breathing, that could blaze up or die down with their will. Their bodies were extraordinarily durable, far tougher than any ordinary person's, and as long as the flame on their back was burning, they were almost impossible to wound. They were, by every account, one of the most physically remarkable peoples ever to live in the world, and they made their home in a place that matched their nature, high up near the top of the world, in the region said to be closest to the gods. They lived above the ordinary world, winged and burning and nearly untouchable, a people who seemed to belong more to the sky than to the earth or the sea, and the world destroyed them. The Lunarians were hunted relentlessly, not because they threatened anyone, but because they were rare and extraordinary, because their durable bodies and their strange fire made them valuable as specimens and as trophies, because the powerful of the world wanted to possess what the Lunarians were. They were captured and killed and experimented upon until they were nearly gone, until only a handful remained, until the entire people had been reduced to a near extinction, so complete that in the present day there is reason to believe only one full-blooded Lunarian still walks the world, the last or nearly the last of a people who once burned bright at the top of the world. a whole race with all its history and its powers and its way of life, hunted down to a single survivor by a world that decided their existence was a resource to be harvested rather than a people to be left in peace. What lifts this from tragedy into mystery is the name and the questions that gather around it. Lunarian, people of the moon. Earlier tonight, we wandered through the mystery of the abandoned cities on the moon, the civilization that fell and came down to the earth, the winged people of the sky who may be descended from those who descended from above. The Lunarians, with their wings and their fire and their name that points straight at the moon, seem to belong to that same web of half told history. Were they descendants of the moon people, a branch of that fallen civilization that kept more of its ancestors' nature than the other branches did? Is the fire on their backs a remnant of something the moon people carried, a piece of the lost technology or lost biology of a civilization that exhausted its own world? And why did the world government, which has erased so much and hidden so much, treat this particular people not merely as a threat to be silenced, but as a thing to be hunted and consumed? The story has left the Lunarians as one of its most haunting open questions, a people nearly erased not by forgetting, but by slaughter, a single survivor carrying the last of a heritage that may reach all the way up to the dead cities on the moon, of fires still burning on one back where once it burned on thousands. We come now to the mystery that sits beneath all the others, the one that the entire story has been sailing toward since its very first page, the treasure at the end of the world, the One Piece itself. For nearly 3 decades, the central question of this story has been almost laughably simple to state. There is a treasure left at the final island at the end of the Grand Line by the king of the pirates, and whoever finds it will be crowned the next king of the pirates. That is the engine that drives everything. That is the reason ships set sail and crews are assembled and the whole vast world is in motion. And in all those years, across all those chapters, the one thing the story has never done is tell you what the treasure actually is. Oda has guarded this secret more carefully than any other, and the most remarkable thing about that guarding is what he has revealed about it. He has said that he decided what the One Piece was before he drew the first chapter, that the answer has existed in his mind since the beginning, that the destination was set before the ship ever left the harbor. The treasure is not something he has been improvising toward. It is something he has been sailing toward, on purpose, for his entire career. What is known about the treasure is strange and specific and deeply suggestive. It is located on the final island, a place that had no recorded name until the king of the pirates and his crew arrived there. And what happened when they arrived is the single most important clue the story has offered about the nature of what waits at the end. They laughed. The crew that reached the end of the world, that found the treasure that the entire world has been chasing for centuries, did not weep or fall silent or stand in awe. They laughed. Not the bitter laughter of disappointment, not the broken laughter of madness, but real laughter, the laughter of people who have understood something enormous and genuinely funny, who have arrived at the end of the longest journey in the world and discovered there's something that struck them in that final moment as both overwhelming and absurd. The laughter was so central to what they found that the island took its name from it, became known forever after as the place of the laughing discovery, so that the very name of the final island is a clue pointing at the emotional shape of the secret it holds. So the mystery of the One Piece is not just what the treasure is, but what kind of truth could produce that exact reaction. What could a person find at the end of the world that would make hardened pirates, people who had seen everything the world had to offer, throw back their heads and laugh? The clues the story has scattered point in directions that feel deliberate rather than accidental. The treasure is bound up with the forbidden history of the void century, with the truth the world has spent 800 years erasing, with the figure called Joy Boy and the promise he made and could not keep, with the will the world fears and the hidden ruler who guards the empty throne. Whatever waits on the final island, it is not merely gold. It is the answer, the resolution of every thread we have wandered through tonight, the thing that makes the hidden rulers afraid and the erased centuries matter, and the long suffering of the world means something. And it is somehow funny. That is the strangest and most beautiful part of the whole mystery. The truth at the end of the world, the secret worth 800 years of war and silence and erasure, the thing the most powerful people in the world have killed and drowned and hunted to keep hidden, made the men who found it laugh. We will not solve it tonight. Oda has kept it sealed for nearly 30 years, and he will keep it sealed until the ending he drew before the beginning finally arrives. But we can sit here in the dark with the shape of it, a treasure at the end of the world, and a sound of laughter rising from the place where it waits. There is one more secret hidden at the top of the world before we descend, for the last time tonight, into the deepest mystery of all. It is something kept in the Holy Land of Mary Jawas, a secret so dangerous that its mere exposure is said to be capable of toppling the entire order of the world, and the story has named it, only obliquely, as a kind of national treasure, a thing the rulers of the world are quietly sitting on, whose revelation they fear more than any army. The hint arrived from the mouth of a defeated villain, a man who had once moved in the highest circles of the world's power and knew its secrets from the inside. After his fall, he spoke, almost idly, of a great secret kept in the Holy Land, and he said that if this secret were ever brought into the light, it would shake the world to its foundations. It would, he suggested, do more than embarrass the powerful or expose a scandal. It would unmake the very justification on which the rulers of the world stand, the story they tell to explain why they deserve to rule, the foundation beneath 800 years of authority. Whatever this thing is, the man implied, the entire structure of the world's power depends on it staying hidden, and the moment it is exposed, the structure begins to fall. This is one of those mysteries that is more powerful for being undefined. The story has not told us what the secret is. It has only told us what it would do, which in some ways is more frightening, because it lets the reader feel the weight of the thing without ever seeing its shape. We know there is something in the Holy Land that the rulers of the world are afraid of. We know it is connected to the foundation of their power, to the story they tell about themselves, to the legitimacy that lets a small group of families treat the rest of the world as beneath them. And we know that it is kept in the same place where the empty throne hides its occupant, where the giant straw hat is preserved, where the fire that fell on a kingdom is guarded, which means that the Holy Land at the top of the world is less a seat of government than a vault, a place stuffed with the dangerous truths and dangerous objects that the rulers of the world have spent 8 centuries keeping locked away. What could it be? A document, perhaps, that records the truth of how the world government came to power, the truth the void century was erased to hide, an object that proves the rulers are not what they claim to be, that the right by which they rule is a lie, a piece of the old world preserved as both trophy and threat that would expose the founding of the present order as a crime rather than a triumph. The story keeps every possibility open, and in doing so, it makes the Holy Land feel heavier and more dangerous with every visit, because the reader knows that somewhere in that place sits a secret that the most powerful people in the world would do anything to keep buried, a secret whose exposure they fear more than war, more than rebellion, more than the loss of any island or any fleet. They have erased centuries and drowned kingdoms and hunted peoples to extinction to protect the foundation of their power. And somewhere at the top of the world, that foundation rests on a single hidden thing, waiting, like everything else we have visited tonight, for the moment it is finally dragged into the light. And so we arrive, at the end of our wandering, at the mystery beneath all the mysteries, the silence beneath all the silences, the empty space on the map of history into which nearly everything we have spoken of tonight eventually drains. It is the lost century, the 100 years that the world is forbidden to remember, and the kingdom whose very name has been taken out of history so completely that no one alive knows what it was called. 800 years ago, the story tells us there was a great kingdom. It was a powerful and advanced civilization, possessed of knowledge and technology and ideals that the present world has lost, a kingdom that built things the modern world cannot build and believed things the modern world has forgotten, and this kingdom was destroyed. An alliance of 20 other kingdoms rose against it, made war upon it, and brought it down, and from the ashes of that war, the victors founded the world government that has ruled ever since. The 100 years surrounding that war became a void in the historical record, a stretch of time that the new rulers erased so thoroughly that it is known only as the blank century, the lost century, the period about which nothing is officially known and about which it is forbidden, on pain of death, to inquire. The kingdom that was destroyed was not merely defeated, it was erased, its name forbidden, its history scrubbed, its truth made into a crime to remember. The strangeness of this erasure is the depth and the violence of it. The world government does not simply prefer that the void century be forgotten. It enforces the forgetting with everything it has. The ancient stone records that preserve the truth of those years are forbidden to be read, and the people who learn to read them are hunted. An entire island of scholars, a place of learning that had spent generations carefully piecing together the history of the lost century, was destroyed completely, its people killed, its library burned, its knowledge scattered, because they had come too close to understanding what really happened. To even pursue the truth of the void century is treated as the gravest crime in the world, more dangerous than piracy, more dangerous than murder, a crime against the very foundation of the world's order. And that tells you, more clearly than any direct statement could, that the truth of those 100 years is not merely embarrassing or inconvenient. It is the secret on which everything else rests. It is the thing the empty throne was built to bury, the thing the hidden ruler has lived 800 years to guard, the thing the giant straw hat and the fire from the sky and the national treasure all circle around. What was the kingdom? What did it believe? And what did it build? And why was it so threatening that it had to be not only defeated, but erased? What is its forbidden name? Why does the will that the world fears, the bloodline marked by a single hidden letter, seem to descend from that lost age and carry its memory forward across the centuries? And what is the connection between that ancient destroyed kingdom and the cheerful boy in the straw hat who is sailing right now toward the final island where the truth is said to wait? The story has spent nearly 3 decades laying the clues, the poneglyphs, and the laughter, and the inherited will, and the promise that could not be kept, and it has kept the center of it all in shadow, the way it keeps the one piece in shadow, the way it keeps the figure on the throne in shadow. The lost century is the dark room at the heart of the house, the one door the story has not yet opened, and behind it sits the answer to nearly everything. The truth of how the world came to be the way it is, the reason the powerful are so afraid, and the meaning of a journey that began with a straw hat and a promise, and has been sailing toward that forbidden 100 years ever since. Before we let the night finish closing over us, there is one last strange thing worth sitting with, and it touches the oldest human wish of all, the wish to not die. There is, hidden among the countless powers of the devil fruits, a single ability rumored to be able to defeat death itself, and the price it demands is one of the strangest and saddest bargains in the entire story. Among the devil fruits, most grant a power and a curse in equal measure, a strength on land and a weakness in the sea. But one fruit is spoken of differently, treated by the underworlds and by the powerful as something beyond an ordinary power, a thing worth more than any other fruit in the world, sought across generations by people who would give anything to possess it. It grants its user the ability to manipulate bodies and objects with a precision that approaches the godlike, but that is not what makes it the most coveted fruit in the world. What makes it priceless is a single hidden technique, an ultimate operation that the fruit can perform only once. With it, the user can grant another person eternal youth, not long life, not slowed aging, eternal youth, a body that will never grow old, never weaken, never die of time. The power to make another human being immortal. And here is the bargain, the strange, cruel cost that the story attaches to this miracle. The user who performs the operation dies. To grant another person eternal life, the wielder of the fruit must give up their own, spending their entire existence in a single act to lift the burden of death from someone else's shoulders. The power to conquer death exists, but it cannot be used selfishly. You cannot make yourself immortal with it. You can only make someone else immortal, and only by laying down your own life to do it, so that every act of granting eternal youth is also an act of complete self-sacrifice, a death freely given so that another may never die. It is the most generous and the most terrible power in the world at the same time, a gift that can only be given by someone willing to disappear in the giving of it. What makes this one of the quietest mysteries in the story is the question of what it implies about the rest of the world. We have wandered tonight through a remarkable number of beings who do not seem to die. The figure on the empty throne, alive for 800 years. The five old men who kneel before that figure, unchanged since the founding. The great elephant walking its endless punishment. The story is full of things that have outlived any natural span, and it is not always explained how. And here, sitting quietly among the devil fruits, is a power that can grant exactly that: eternal youth, a body outside of time, immortality bought with another's sacrifice. The story has never connected these dots directly. It has never said that the hidden ruler or the ancient elders owe their long lives to this fruit or to anything like it. But it has placed the possibility on the table in plain sight, the way it places so many of its deepest answers, leaving the reader to wonder whether the immortals at the top of the world purchase their endless lives the way this fruit purchases them with someone else's death, or whether their longevity comes from something stranger still that the story has yet to name: a power to conquer death, sitting quietly in the world, priced in self sacrifice, surrounded by beings who have somehow conquered death already. The connection may be nothing, or it may be one more thread in the great pattern, waiting, like all the others, to be drawn together at the end. There is one last mystery to drift through before we gather everything together, and it is the strangest because it is the most familiar. It is the sea itself, the great impossible ocean at the center of the world, the stretch of water that every part of this story sails across without anyone ever quite explaining why it behaves the way it does. The grand line is the ocean that matters most in One Piece, the band of sea where the real journey happens, and it is unlike any ordinary stretch of water anywhere. Its weather does not obey any rule a sailor could learn. A clear sky can become a hurricane in moments. A calm sea can rise into mountains of water without warning, and a ship can pass from blazing heat into a snowstorm in the space of an afternoon. The ordinary instruments of navigation do not work there. A compass spins uselessly because the islands of the Grand Line each generate their own magnetic fields, pulling at the needle from every direction at once, so that the only way to navigate is with a special instrument that locks onto the pull of a single island at a time and leads a ship from one to the next, like a child crossing a stream by stepping on stones. And bordering this chaotic sea on either side are two stretches of water called the calm belts, where no wind ever blows and no current ever moves, where a ship can sit becalmed forever beneath a dead sky, and where the sea below teems with monsters so enormous that to drift into those waters is to invite something to rise up from the deep and swallow the ship whole. Step back and look at this arrangement, and it stops seeming like geography and starts seeming like design. Why is there one stretch of ocean where the rules of weather and magnetism and navigation simply break down? Why is it bordered so precisely by belts of dead calm full of guardian monsters, as though the sea itself were trying to keep ships out, as though the most important ocean in the world were also the most heavily defended? The story treats the strangeness of the Grand Line as simply the way the world is, a natural feature that sailors have learned to live with. But the more you sit with it, the less natural it feels. The weather that obeys no rule, the islands that scramble every compass, the belts of monsters guarding the entrances, all of it conspires to make the central sea of the world nearly impossible to cross, to ensure that only the most determined and the most capable ever reach the far end where the treasure waits. And that is the quiet suggestion buried in the chaos. The Grand Line behaves less like an ocean and more like a test, a gauntlet, a thing built or shaped to let only certain people through. The world is mostly water, and most of that water is ordinary. But this one band of it, the band that leads to the end of the world, and the truth at the end of it, is a maze of impossible weather and broken instruments and monster haunted calms. Whether the sea is this way by nature or by something older and stranger, whether the chaos is an accident of the world's geography or a barrier left over from the age that built the poneglyphs and the weapons and the floating remnants of drowned cities, the story has never said. It has only let the reader feel, voyage after voyage, that the sea at the center of the world is not entirely indifferent, that it seems almost to be guarding something, that the long, hard road to the final island is hard for a reason. The ocean keeps its own secrets, the same way the throne and the century and the treasure keep theirs, and the strangeness of the Grand Line is one more quiet question hiding inside something the reader had long ago stopped thinking to ask about. And that, in the end, is the thing to understand about all of these mysteries, the quiet truth underneath the long, strange list we have wandered through tonight. None of them are loose threads. None of them are accidents or details that got away from their author. They are part of a single design, drawn by one man at a desk over the course of nearly 30 years, a man who decided where the story was going before he drew the first page and has been patiently laying the path toward it ever since. Tonight we have wandered through the strangest corners of that design together. We have looked at a chair that was supposed to be empty and the 800-year-old figure who sits in it. We have listened for a voice that speaks from stones and ancient creatures, audible only to a chosen few. We have walked beside an elephant carrying a country and a 1,000-year-old crime it will not name. We have stood in front of a giant straw hat in a hidden room, looked up at the abandoned cities on the moon, watched an ancient robot open its eyes after centuries of sleep, and followed a woman who stepped across the years as though they were stones in a stream. We have wondered why the sea hates the fruits it surrounds, where those fruits go when their owners die, whether a ship can have a soul, and whether a sea exists somewhere where all the world's fish gather in one place. We have sat with a skeleton playing music alone in the fog for 50 years, and with a fire that fell from the sky and erased a kingdom in an afternoon, and with a power hidden among the devil fruits that can defeat death itself at the cost of the life that wields it. We have visited a kingdom erased from history within living memory, a man whose very name the world scrubbed away, a mother who vanished with a room full of children, a city of gold flung into the sky, a great golden bell that fell silent and then rang again, and a people hunted nearly to extinction for the fire on their backs. We have stood at the edge of a secret, kept in the Holy Land that could topple the world if it were ever brought into the light, and we have felt the strangeness of the Central Sea itself, the chaotic ocean that scrambles every compass and guards its far shore with belts of monsters and dead calm. And at the very end, we have looked at a treasure waiting at the end of the world that made the hardest men alive throw back their heads and laugh. Underneath all of it, drawing all of it down toward itself like water, finding the lowest point in the land, we have circled the lost century, the forbidden 100 years, the dark room at the heart of the house where the answer to nearly everything is waiting behind a door the story has not yet opened. Each of these mysteries is a small light in that darkness, and not one of them shines all the way to the bottom. And that is exactly why they keep us coming back night after night to sit with them in the quiet and wonder. None of it resolved tonight, and that was never the point. The point was to drift through these mysteries slowly, in the dark, the way you drift toward sleep, letting each strange shape rise up and be looked at and gently set back down. The story that holds them all is still being drawn, somewhere, right now, by a man who is probably awake far later than he should be, adding one more detail to a design that has been unfolding since before most of the people reading it were born. There is always another mystery in one piece. There is always another layer beneath the one you just understood, another door behind the door you just opened, another quiet question tucked into the corner of a panel, waiting for the reader who is paying close enough attention to find it. And that, more than any single secret, is the deepest and most wonderful, unsolved mystery of all. The simple fact that no matter how long you look, there's always something more still waiting in the dark. Thank you for drifting through these mysteries with me tonight. If you found some rest here in the quiet spaces between the questions, that is all I hoped for. There's another calm story waiting just to the left whenever you are ready for it, ready to carry you a little deeper into the dark and a little further toward sleep. For now, let the questions go. You do not have to solve any of them tonight. They have waited 800 years already, and they will wait a little longer, patient as the sea, while you let your thoughts grow soft and slow and finally still. Let them sink back down beneath the surface where they live, the empty throne and the silent bell and the laughter at the end of the world, all of it settling quietly into the dark, like stones coming to rest on the seabed. And let yourself rest with them, somewhere out on the quiet water, rocked gently by a current that has been moving since long before you were born, and will keep moving long after you have drifted off. The story goes on being drawn. The answers go on waiting, and the long voyage toward them continues, slowly in the dark, for a morning that is still a very long way off.